this video, we will discuss the movie Anaconda by summarizing its storyline, breaking down the plot, and exploring the key characters. We will also look into the film's production details and box office performance. Finally, we'll share reviews along with our personal reaction. So, let's get started. Anaconda has officially slithered its way to a box office milestone. The Sony adventure comedy starring Jack Black and Paul Rudd has crossed the $100 million mark worldwide. As of now, the film's global total stands at $101 million, with $50 million earned domestically and $51 million internationally. On Friday alone, Anaconda brought in $1.2 million from 3,075 locations and is projected to reach $4.6 million in its third weekend, pushing its domestic total to approximately $53.7 million by Sunday. The film was released on Christmas Day last year and serves as a reimagining of the classic 1997 snake horror movie. This time, the story focuses on two lifelong best friends, played by Jack Black and Paul Rudd, who have always dreamed of remaking their all-time favorite movie. When a midlife crisis finally pushes them to act, they venture deep into the Amazon rainforest to begin filming. However, their light-hearted project turns deadly when a real giant anaconda appears, transforming their low-budget movie set into a dangerous survival situation. The official synopsis reveals that the film is directed by Tom Gormican, known for the unbearable weight of massive talent. He also co-wrote the script alongside Kevin Etten, with Jack Black and Paul Rudd contributing creatively as well. The adventure comedy also stars Sultan Mello and Daniela Melchior. Producers include Brad Fuller and Andrew Form under the Fully Formed Entertainment production banner. The box office experienced an up and down year, but the end of 2025 is finishing strong. James Cameron's Avatar, Fire and Ash dominated the Christmas weekend with $64 million, leading a surprisingly strong lineup. The top 7 films each earned at least $10 million domestically, a rare achievement in today's market. While Anaconda did not top the charts, it performed impressively alongside films like The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, which earned an estimated $14 million, and The Housemaid, which pulled in $15.4 million. Sony's new meta-creature feature had more than just a single weekend to prove itself, opening with $23 million in the US and $20 million overseas for a $43 million global start against a modest $45 million budget. This unexpected success adds to the long-running Anaconda franchise, which includes several sequels and made-for-TV films released between 2004 and 2015. Despite competition from major releases, this monster movie managed to hold its ground with audiences. Much of that success can be credited to Jack Black's star power and his ability to connect with viewers during an uncertain box office era. Aside from Borderlands, which underperformed, Black's recent projects have been largely successful, and that misfire can hardly be blamed on him. Following the success of the Super Mario Bros. Movie, Kung Fu Panda 4, and a Minecraft movie, this new release now serves as another notable entry in the current wave of franchise-driven cinema. The film functions as a sequel driven by lifelong fans of the original 1997 movie who set out to remake it for a new generation. The two protagonists, played by Jack Black and Paul Rudd, are exactly the type of characters who would raise their fists in frustration while watching disappointing adaptations like The Dark Tower, which debuted a few years ago before being quietly re-released in 2017. That film ultimately disappointed both longtime fans of Stephen King's sprawling fantasy novel series and general audiences who approached it with little background knowledge. The Dark Tower property is now being rebooted by filmmaker Mike Flanagan, who has successfully adapted several of King's works in the past. The original theatrical version, however, suffered from a troubled production and opened to extremely poor reviews before collapsing at the box office. It has since been surpassed by the new Anaconda film, which is expected to cross the $100 million mark at the global box office very soon. Produced on a reported budget of $45 million, Anaconda has already earned around $50 million domestically and continues to perform steadily in theaters. By contrast, the Dark Tower adaptation was headlined by Idris Elba and Matthew McConaughey and told the story primarily from the perspective of the gunslinger, played by Elba. The film was directed by Danish filmmaker Nikolaj Arcel, previously known for the Oscar-nominated drama A Royal Affair. Arcel later directed another period drama, The Promised Land, which achieved an impressive 97% score on Rotten Tomatoes. The Dark Tower, however, currently sits at a disastrous 16% on the same aggregator. Among Stephen King adaptations, it ranks near the bottom, performing worse than nearly all others except a handful of Children of the Corn sequels, the Firestarter remake, and A Sound of Thunder. The year 2025 has been a mixed one for King fans, with projects such as The Long Walk, The Running Man, The Life of Chuck, The Monkey, and television series like It, Welcome to Derry generating varied reactions. Looking ahead, fans can anticipate the Fawn Games TV series and the non-King release The Exorcist, Reborn, which opened to mixed reviews and currently holds a 51% score on Rotten Tomatoes. By contrast, Anaconda has found worldwide success thanks to a strong Christmas release window and the comedic chemistry of Jack Black, Paul Rudd, and Sultan Mello, who fully embrace the film's intentionally ridiculous tone. After completing its first full week in theaters worldwide, Anaconda has passed its first major box office milestone and successfully recovered its production budget. That said, the film still has a long road ahead before being considered a definitive success, especially with heavy competition impacting its domestic performance as it battles titles like The Housemaid and Midsommar for a top 5 weekend ranking. While Anaconda is based on the 1997 cult classic, it openly acknowledges its legacy and uses that premise as a springboard rather than a direct remake. Ahead of this weekend, the film also managed to surpass one of the most influential cult hits of the early 21st century, Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow. That 2004 sci-fi film, directed by Kerry Conran, earned $37 million domestically and $58 million worldwide but was considered a box office disappointment due to its reported $70 million production budget. Anaconda has now officially overtaken those lifetime totals, marking another notable achievement in its theatrical run. However, Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow is now widely regarded as a cult hit of its era, particularly for its groundbreaking use of fully digital backdrops filmed almost entirely on soundstages. The industry's attitude toward digital environments has swung like a pendulum over the years, especially after the Marvel Cinematic Universe leaned heavily into similar techniques. That shift has even led modern productions to emphasize practical sets in their marketing campaigns, with filmmakers frequently citing actors like Angelina Jolie in films like Sky Captain as early innovators. Despite initial skepticism, Sky Captain received mostly positive reviews and currently holds a 71% score on Rotten Tomatoes. While the film is relatively thin when it comes to plot and character development, its ambitious visuals more than compensate. Over the past 2 decades, it has gained appreciation in much the same way as the characters played by Jack Black and Paul Rudd in Anaconda, projects driven more by enthusiasm and spectacle than narrative depth. Anaconda, which opened to mixed reviews, currently sits at a 52% Rotten Tomatoes score. The critical consensus suggests that while the premise is right for an action-comedy revival, the execution struggles to fully commit, resulting in clashing tones. Directed by Tom Gormican and produced on a reported budget of $45 million, the film is currently playing in theaters, with more updates expected as its box office run continues. As of 2025, Anaconda is steadily climbing the franchise's all-time box office chart. The comedy stars Jack Black and Paul Rudd as 2 longtime friends attempting to remake the 1997 cult classic, only for their plans to go wildly off track when a real-life giant snake appears. The film was co-written by Tom Gormican and also stars Sultan Mello. By reaching its current global box office total, the Paul Rudd-led film managed to surpass the worldwide gross of 2024's Anaconda, Hunt for Blood in fewer than 11 days. This achievement positions it as the franchise's highest-grossing installment since the original creature feature debuted in 1997, which launched the long-running series. That said, the film still faces competition from Paramount features that premiered in early January. During its second weekend, Anaconda experienced a relatively narrow drop of just 31%, a promising sign. Combined with its audience reception, a cinema score of B and a moderate Rotten Tomatoes audience rating, this could help push the film closer to profitability, even if it ultimately falls short of breakout success. With a reported budget of $45 million, the film's break-even point is estimated to be around $120 million worldwide. At its current pace, Anaconda is likely to finish in the black, potentially earning a modest profit of approximately $24 million. This outcome remains well within reach based on current trends. If the film performs similarly during its upcoming third weekend, it could add roughly $7 million domestically over that 3-day span alone. That would move it more than 28% closer to its overall target, pushing it past the 50% mark toward profitability. Internationally, the film's overseas earnings continue to closely mirror its domestic performance. As of Sunday morning projections, Anaconda is expected to reach a global box office total of approximately $87 million by the end of its second weekend. This figure includes around $45 million domestically and an additional $42 million from international markets. By hitting this milestone, the film once again surpasses the lifetime gross of Anaconda, Hunt for Blood, and strengthens its standing within the franchise. Still, the 2025 Anaconda reboot will need to earn an additional $49 million if it hopes to become the highest-grossing installment in the franchise's history. Whether it can reach that goal remains to be seen as its theatrical run continues. However, the film still has a real chance of reaching that benchmark because it debuted on Christmas Day. Holiday season releases typically benefit from strong staying power throughout January. While it does face competition from Paramount's new creature feature, that film experienced a steep 81% drop during its soft second weekend. By comparison, Anaconda's relatively solid Rotten Tomatoes score of 76% and decent audience reception could help propel it across the finish line. I'll admit, the concept behind this new version of Anaconda initially struck me as genuinely promising. The idea of childhood friends, now in their late 40s and early 50s, traveling to the Amazon to remake Anaconda of all movies feels just silly enough to work. On paper, it sounds ridiculous in the best possible way. Unfortunately, part of the problem lies with director Tom Gormican, who consistently comes up with clever meta-concepts but rarely pushes them far enough. This was also true of The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, and the issue is even more apparent here. Another major issue is that I never fully bought into the central premise. The film asks us to believe that these four friends would realistically travel to the Amazon because one of them supposedly secured the rights to remake Anaconda. That setup never feels authentic or convincing, and the movie does little to sell it as believable. The characters themselves don't help much either. Jack Black plays a wedding videographer who always dreamed of becoming a director. Paul Rudd portrays a former childhood friend who has grown into a middling Hollywood actor now stuck doing radio work. Daniela Melchior plays another friend who is newly divorced, while Sultan Mello appears as a neurotic documentary cameraman. All of them are talented performers, but they're weighed down by a plot that requires them to behave in unrealistically foolish ways, and none of them fully rise above it. Even so, I could have forgiven the shaky premise if the movie had fully committed to its absurdity. Instead, what we get is a safe, PG-13 holiday comedy that pulls its punches. The humor feels muted, the satire lacks bite, and the film is nowhere near as sharp or bold as a true reboot, or even the original Anaconda, should have been. The jokes are easy and obvious, many of them already revealed in the trailers. Paul Rudd's presence alone is usually enough to sell me on a movie, and to his credit, he clearly tries to inject energy into the role. But even that effort isn't enough to save the thinly written characters. The only performance that genuinely lands comedically belongs to Sultan Mello, who recently played a much more serious role elsewhere and here stands out as a snake handler who happens to own his own pet anaconda. As the film escalates into mutant, man-eating snake territory, it struggles to balance horror and comedy. Gormican attempts to juggle both tones, but neither ever fully clicks. In the end, this version of Anaconda is something of a letdown. Big screen comedies are increasingly rare these days, and I genuinely miss seeing them in theaters. The Nice Guys was a welcome throwback, a reminder of an era when you could shut off your brain for 90 minutes and still walk away satisfied. I was hoping for something similar here, but sadly, this film never quite delivers. There's an attempt to frame the snake as a metaphor for unrealized dreams and lingering regrets, a theme lightly explained near the end of the film. This idea echoes what the filmmaker has said about his approach to the 1997 original. But the truth is, Anaconda isn't really about anything deeper than an anaconda, and neither was the original. That's not inherently a problem. Sometimes, it's enough for a movie to simply be entertaining. The issue is that this film doesn't fully live up to that lesson. The argument that a movie only needs to be fun would land far more convincingly if the film itself were actually satisfying to watch. Rather than feeling inspired, I found myself wishing for anything, to truly sink my teeth into. The premise, conceived by The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent co-writer and directed in a similar meta-comedy vein, is clever on paper but frustrating in execution. Jack Black plays an aspiring filmmaker who never quite made it, now stuck filming wedding videos in Buffalo and New York. When his lifelong best friend suddenly approaches him with an offer he can't refuse, the hook is irresistible. What if they tried to mount a remake, reboot, or reimagining, or perhaps a legacy sequel, because Hollywood marketing terms are part of the joke, of their all-time favorite childhood thriller, Anaconda? Never mind that this friend doesn't remotely resemble someone who could realistically secure the rights, or that what we see of Paul Rudd's struggling actor character suggests very little untapped directing genius. The point, at least in theory, is for this group to reconnect with the joy they felt as teenagers, running around with cameras, shooting half-baked passion projects inspired equally by Martin Scorsese and kitschy B-movie creature features. You can probably guess the enormous problems they run into once they head into the jungle. Unlike the original, however, this version strips away most of the horror. The Anaconda itself is bigger this time, closer to something out of Jurassic Park than a grounded creature feature. It's good for a jump scare or two, but not much else. Most of the kills happen quickly and under heavy shadow, a convenient way to mask the limitations of the CGI budget. The film never delivers anything as memorably grotesque as the partially digested body reveal from the 1997 original. Instead, the movie leans hard into broad comedy. For a while, that approach almost works, largely because the cast is genuinely charming. Jack Black remains a compelling screen presence, even when playing characters who are overly self-important or emotionally stalled. His character's biggest professional achievement being a 4-episode arc on a network sitcom is funny in theory, but the film never fully explores the insecurity beneath it. There are enjoyable moments watching the group banter, trading insults around the dinner table, needling one another over old grievances, and briefly recapturing the chemistry of longtime friends. I laughed more than once, and overall I had an okay time watching it. But that feeling slowly fades as it becomes clear the movie is satisfied with being nearly okay. To its credit, the film doesn't skimp on action. Characters race through the jungle by foot, car, and boat, and there's a steady sense of motion throughout. Unfortunately, the action itself feels weightless and uninspired, lacking the tension or spectacle needed to elevate it. It often feels like the movie wants to be bigger, louder, and more franchise-ready than its material can support. The humor fares slightly better in smaller, character-based moments, such as a sweetly awkward kiosk owner who claims to be below sober, meaning only beer and wine, or a clumsy attempt to save someone from spider venom that plays like a desperate slapstick gag. Still, many of these jokes feel mildly amusing at best and overstretched at worst. The film's supposed heartwarming core, about friendship, regret, and unfinished dreams, never quite lands. The central relationships are written so broadly that the characters barely feel like real people. Despite their professed love for Anaconda, the film has surprisingly little to say about why this movie mattered so much to them beyond vague comments about how cool it was. Yes, the film delivers the expected callbacks, including a cameo that's designed to get applause, but there's never a strong sense of emotional connection to the property itself. You're left wondering why this movie meant more to them than any other childhood favorite. That absence makes the whole project feel hollow. At times, I found myself wishing the film had leaned harder into raw instinct. Sure, that might have meant embracing messier violence, stranger tonal choices, and riskier storytelling, but at least it would have felt like a true labor of love. Instead, this version plays like a big-budget extension designed to pretend it's sweeter and more personal than it really is. You don't need to fall prey to its charm just because it's wearing nostalgia and sincerity on its sleeve. At the end of the day, this Columbia Pictures production wants to feel heartfelt and scrappy, but too often it settles for safe and superficial. Columbia Pictures' decision to cast Paul Rudd and Jack Black places Anaconda, 2025, squarely within a familiar mid-budget comfort zone. Projects like this often walk a fine line, either cleverly reworking their source material or existing purely as uninspired cash-ins. Tom Gormican's self-reflexive Anaconda remake ultimately lands somewhere in the middle. It's a film that understands what it wants to say about nostalgia and Hollywood recycling, but isn't always sure how to say it. At its best, Anaconda, 2025, smartly acknowledges its place within Hollywood's ongoing obsession with reboots. The film's meta-setup, about characters filming a reimagining that spirals into a dangerous real-life remake, starts off as a wonderfully self-aware idea. It gestures toward the unrealized creative dreams many industry hopefuls once had, while also commenting on the increasingly lifeless landscape of modern American studio comedy. Gradually, the film attempts to transform this premise into both an adventure comedy and a sincere ode to chasing long-abandoned dreams. That ambition is admirable even if the execution is messy and scattered. The humor oscillates between absurd and relatable, driven largely by the personalities of its central cast rather than the strength of the script itself. Jack Black stars as a wedding videographer who dreams of making a real film, while Paul Rudd plays his childhood friend who made it to Los Angeles, albeit without the success he once imagined. Years later, both men are dissatisfied with their average lives when Rudd's character surprises Black with news that he's somehow secured the rights to remake their favorite childhood movie. The very idea of remaking Anaconda, as the film itself jokes, feels ridiculous on its face, and that absurdity fuels some of the movie's best punchlines. What begins as a creative escape soon turns into a misguided emotional reckoning. Old wounds resurface, grief is awkwardly addressed, and the group ropes in their longtime friends, played by Daniela, Melchior and Sultan Mello, to join the project. Once they arrive in the Amazon and begin filming their masterpiece, the story introduces gold smugglers and other underdeveloped antagonists, adding clutter to an already overstuffed script. Things escalate when a real anaconda enters the picture, transforming their cheerful, low-budget shoot into a fight for survival. While Gormican sometimes struggles to balance comedy and danger, often running gags into the ground or telegraphing jokes too early, the film powers through many of its weaker moments on sheer cast chemistry. Whether it's a frantic rescue attempt or an over-the-top sequence involving poison and panic, the actors sell moments that would otherwise fall flat on the page. The film's wildly swinging tone is held together almost entirely by the natural interplay of its core ensemble. Jack Black, in particular, tones down his usual man-child persona and delivers a more earnest, grounded performance. His frustration with lifelong inaction is genuinely relatable, even as he commits fully to the film's exaggerated comedic extremes. Paul Rudd, meanwhile, brings a familiar likability that helps smooth over narrative bumps, while Sultan Mello frequently steals scenes with unpredictable energy that injects much-needed life into the film's more chaotic stretches. The movie's climactic sequences strike a surprisingly effective balance between tension and slapstick, offering flashes of what the film could have been with tighter focus. While Anaconda, 2025, occasionally stumbles, particularly with an on-the-nose cameo meant to evoke nostalgia, it never completely loses momentum. It may not reinvent the creature feature genre, nor does it fully capitalize on its clever premise, but it carries enough comedic energy and charm to remain engaging. In the end, this remake survives not because of its script or its spectacle, but because of the chemistry between its leads and a handful of sequences that successfully blend nail-biting tension with chaotic humor. It's an uneven ride, but one that occasionally finds a satisfying rhythm between absurdity and sincerity. Not only does the film feature one of Jack Black's sharpest and most perfectly timed comedic outbursts of the year, an explosive moment that lands with real impact, but Anaconda, 2025, is also noticeably held back by uneven visual effects, flat cinematography, and occasionally lazy staging. These shortcomings feel especially frustrating in a movie that champions a DIY filmmaking spirit. A tighter, sharper visual identity could have better supported the scrappy, word-of-mouth energy the film so clearly wants to embody, an energy that feels largely absent from most contemporary studio comedies. At its core, the film seems to gesture toward two larger ideas. First, that a community can create space for people who feel sidelined or dismissed by society. Second, that belief, whether in art, purpose, or identity, can become dangerously all-consuming if left unquestioned. These themes echo throughout the narrative, particularly in how characters rally around a shared dream that slowly takes on outsized meaning. The film does not shy away from acknowledging that such devotion can resemble a cult-like mindset. There's a clear understanding that blind belief has the potential to cause unintended harm, especially when dissenters are pushed aside or silenced. And yet, the movie never passes judgment on these characters. Their sincerity is treated with surprising tenderness, reframed as an expression of love, connection, and collective passion rather than fanaticism. That emotional sincerity finds its strongest expression through spectacle. The film's most powerful sequences lean into heightened, almost ecstatic moments of release, scenes where music, movement, and shared emotion take precedence over dialogue. These sequences are visually striking, with choreography that feels bold, unconventional, and deeply human. Large group movements arranged in concentric patterns emphasize unity and belonging, while precise camera placement captures both the intimacy and scale of these moments. The cinematography shines brightest here, using wide compositions to frame dozens of performers at once, creating a sense of enormity and shared purpose. singing and movement recur during moments of joy, fear, grief, and celebration, reinforcing the idea that expression itself is a form of survival. Whether in triumph or tragedy, these characters communicate through performance. Crucially, the film never asks the audience to agree with the beliefs driving these characters. It doesn't even demand full understanding. Instead, it invites viewers to observe, to witness the beauty and danger of conviction without overt commentary. There's an intentional vagueness to some of the philosophy at play, suggesting that many of these ideas are born more from emotional impulse than carefully reasoned ideology. There's a subtle cautionary note running beneath the surface, a recognition of how easy it is to fall into collective obsession. And yet, the film also acknowledges that these people ultimately want to be left alone, to build something meaningful together, even if it's imperfect. Notably, the movie avoids romanticizing labor or productivity, focusing instead on communal space and emotional bonds rather than physical output. The result is a patient, often beautiful film that communicates more through movement and tone than exposition. Its musical and performance-driven moments carry emotional weight that dialogue alone could not. The camera lingers just long enough to let these scenes breathe, allowing the audience to fully absorb their intensity. In a broader industry context, the film also functions as a quiet commentary on Hollywood itself. It openly acknowledges the dominance of intellectual property, even joking that the only reason this movie exists is because a recognizable brand was used to lure audiences in. But that joke lands less as comedy and more as tragedy, a bleak admission that original, star-driven comedies are increasingly seen as unmarketable. Ultimately, the film highlights an uncomfortable truth: it's no longer enough to put funny people together and let them be funny. In today's studio system, comedy must disguise itself as nostalgia, parody, or IP-driven spectacle just to justify its existence. And while Anaconda, 2025, finds moments of genuine warmth and inspiration within that framework, it also serves as a reminder of how much has been lost along the way. You have to find a way for these characters to confront their problems by fighting a giant snake while also making that struggle mean something, turning spectacle into metaphor. Unfortunately, the snake fighting scenes end up being more disappointing than expected, especially because the film's earlier jungle antics show real promise. The story introduces a group of friends from Buffalo, led by Doug, who grew up dreaming of becoming a major movie director but ultimately settled into a modest life as a husband, father, and wedding videographer. Doug injects wildly inappropriate movie references into his work, much to the irritation of his clients. His boss tries to reassure him that this is a B, maybe even a B+, life, a line that also doubles as a quiet commentary on the kind of movie Anaconda itself might be. Doug's stagnant routine is disrupted when his childhood friend Gary, a struggling Hollywood actor, returns home for Doug's surprise birthday party. Gary arrives with what he claims is an incredible gift. He's supposedly acquired the rights to remake the obscure Japanese novel that inspired the 1987 Anaconda. Inspired by the cast and crew dynamic of the original film, they rope in their old friends Kenny and the recently divorced Claire, pool their remaining savings, less than $50,000, and decide to finally chase the filmmaking dream they abandoned years ago. The group travels to Brazil, where they meet an eccentric snake wrangler and accidentally become entangled with a mysterious young woman on the run from criminals attempting to seize control of a gold mine. Why a crew of 5 people with a shoestring budget would travel from upstate New York to the Amazon to remake Anaconda is never convincingly explained. In fact, very little about what happens once Jack Black, Paul Rudd, and company arrive in Brazil makes logical sense. The audience is simply expected to go along with the increasingly absurd chain of events that follows, up to and including the group encountering an actual oversized snake. The concept itself, a group of middle-aged underachievers grappling with a collective midlife crisis through filmmaking, is absolutely valid comedy material. But it requires a script willing to spend more than a few minutes truly exploring who these characters are as people. Instead, once the group reaches South America, most of the film's more interesting ideas are pushed aside in favor of generic, low-stakes movie-making mishaps. In a world where corporate filmmaking already dominates, complete with studio executives, ego-driven actors, and opportunistic animal trainers all trying to bend projects to their own advantage, Anaconda struggles to find a fresh angle. The satire never cuts deep enough to feel pointed, and the meta-commentary fades into background noise. The film was co-written and directed by Tom Gormican, whose previous work, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, similarly featured a clever, self-aware premise that didn't quite live up to its potential. Here again, the execution never fully matches the ambition. That said, all 4 leads are clearly game to look ridiculous, and they deserve credit for committing to the bit. It's hard to fault them for seeking out a project like this, awkwardly constructed as it may be, especially at a time when big, star-driven comedies are increasingly rare. You take the work where you can get it. The early scenes set in Buffalo are among the film's strongest. The environments look appropriately worn and shabby, with cluttered interiors and harsh daylight pouring through unshaded windows. For a brief stretch, Black and Red's characters feel like genuine longtime friends, grounded in a recognizable reality, before the film leaves that grounding behind and never quite finds its way back. We've lost something essential in recent years, stories about reconnecting through a shared love of movies, or about finding purpose through self-discovery, stories that suggest art can unite people in dark times through shared humanity. Anaconda gestures toward that idea, but only faintly. There is surprisingly little emotional payoff, despite a ballad featured in the film titled Baltina, which seems designed to provide that connective tissue. On the other hand, when a film contains as many flames and fire-filled set pieces as this one, dancing around emotional depth may be beside the point. Even after years of development rumors and social media hype, the storyline still feels slightly cobbled together in the editing room. That said, the action sequences are undeniably flashy. The kinetic jungle and Sky Village set pieces that dominate much of the third act were among the film's most pleasant surprises, delivering genuine spectacle even when the narrative momentum falters. At its best, the film plays like a very dark, very entertaining thriller, drenched in an excellent vintage New York City atmosphere. It keeps building surprise upon surprise, even before John enters the story in a surprisingly effective supporting role. I'm not sure what triggered the nostalgia more, the sight of Shea Stadium, the grainy home video aesthetic, or simply the reminder that a mid-budget adult drama about crime and ambition used to be a regular offering from major Hollywood studios. A few years ago, it would have been almost unthinkable to see a film like this released theatrically, a movie featuring grief, grit, glamour, and risk. Here, 2 central characters, a gig worker and a tech bro, cross paths after a heavenly mishap sparked by well-intentioned but slightly incompetent divine intervention. These kinds of roles suit Nicolas Cage perfectly. He always feels like he exists on a higher plane than the rest of us, and watching him experience something as mundane as eating a cheeseburger, discovering texture, taste, and physical sensation for the first time, becomes oddly transcendent. If I had to choose a single standout supporting performance of 2025, it would be A$AP Rocky. While the film itself isn't among Spike Lee's all-time classics, and can feel sluggishly structured at times, Denzel Washington's music mogul boss is a delight, and Rocky's mysterious presence immediately electrifies the story. His character accidentally kidnaps a rival's driver's son, setting off a chain reaction that pulls the film sharply into focus. Every moment between Washington and Rocky in the recording studio is among the most electric scenes in any movie this year. It's genuinely baffling how overlooked A$AP Rocky continues to be in awards conversations. So far, his only notable recognition has been a nomination for a supporting performance award he didn't even win. Mickey may 17th be louder and more chaotic than Bong Joon-ho's Oscar-winning Parasite, and perhaps that's why audiences seemed unsure what to make of it. The film's box office performance reflects that ambivalence, roughly $50 million domestically and another $50 million internationally, despite being marketed as the long-awaited return of big, theatrical comedies and hailed by some as a referendum on the future of comedy in cinemas. Both films ultimately land as solid B-level successes. Taken together, they function as mirrored stories about creative struggle, one about an artist past his prime confronting irrelevance, the other about a genius just beginning to outgrow his protective bubble. You could argue that a film as conceptually bold as Gorgeous deserved an equally daring making-of documentary, but for the most part, that potential goes unrealized. What remains is a collection of ambitious ideas, striking performances, and fleeting reminders of what mid-budget, adult-oriented filmmaking once looked like, and what it might still become again. It's actually an even more conventional biopic than Blue Moon, expanding across decades of its subject's life and guiding us carefully through every expected rise, fall, and late-night reckoning. By contrast, a boxy black and white film, almost entirely in French, feels like a transmission from another era. Its stripped-down style makes the French New Wave look almost populist by comparison, and yet it somehow landed on Netflix, where it now functions as a gateway drug for younger audiences discovering cinema history for the first time. Try recommending it casually as a fun watch, though, and you'll quickly learn that real commitment requires an HBO Max subscription afterward. Financially, the results are modest but revealing. One major release pulled in roughly $50 million domestically and another $50 million overseas. Meanwhile, a delightful food-centered comedy earned the same $50 million in the US but surged to $120 million internationally, proof that lighter, character-driven films can still travel when the tone is right. That comedy stars Keke Palmer and Ayo Edebiri as roommates whose rent money disappears, forcing them into a desperate scramble for cash before eviction. TikTok culture gives the film its propulsive rhythm, while a sharp screenplay by Sarita Singleton fires off singers with relentless efficiency. In another universe, this could easily be the first installment of a long-running buddy comedy franchise. Palmer and Edebiri are magnetic together, and the film understands exactly how to deploy their chemistry without overstaying its welcome. If you're going to cast someone as a sentient AI struggling to understand humanity, you might as well go with someone as otherworldly as Jared Leto. Leto plays the role with an odd, unsettling calm, not necessarily the film's strongest asset, but not its greatest weakness either. That honor belongs to the film's imaginative visuals and its spectacular Nine Inch Nails soundtrack, which lends technological grandeur to every major plot turn. The digital world bleeds into reality through luminous, painterly 3D imagery. No, it isn't Shakespeare, it's not even Hamlet, but if you're in the mood for neon-soaked tone, texture, and light, it delivers exactly what it promises. You're cordially invited, on the other hand, left me genuinely baffled by the response it received. Directed by the filmmaker behind Forgetting Sarah Marshall, it's a hilarious and unexpectedly sweet romantic comedy starring two comedy A-listers who had never worked together before. The premise is simple and effective: two weddings accidentally booked at the same tiny venue, chaos ensues, and sparks fly. The comic chemistry is undeniable. So of course the film was met with bad reviews and an even worse audience response. Rotten Tomatoes currently has it sitting around 49%, which feels wildly disconnected from what's actually on screen. There were several moments this year when critical and audience reactions felt hostile toward perfectly solid films, but this one left me feeling completely out of sync with popular culture. I genuinely don't understand the backlash. It may sound absurd, but Jenna Ortega's snack-fighting action horror oddity belongs in a lineage that includes Anaconda, Cube, and The Cell. Alongside films like The Faculty and The Ninth Gate, these movies form a strange, wonderful holy trinity of late 20th century Hollywood weirdness, films that invite you to dream with your eyes open. Each became iconic not because of realism, but because of atmosphere, audacity, and the courage to be strange. That's why this new Anaconda caught my attention in the first place. It's the kind of movie my friends and I loved as kids growing up in Buffalo, the kind we watched obsessively and tried to recreate with camcorders and backyard stunts. I wasn't thrilled by the idea of an Anaconda revival in 2025. I would have been perfectly content letting the franchise die quietly on direct-to-DVD shelves and late-night sci-fi reruns. When the original Anaconda came out, the most shocking thing to me wasn't the snake, it was that Ice Cube survived a horror movie at all. Back then, black characters almost never did, unless the film itself was made by a black filmmaker. That memory alone gives the franchise a strange cultural weight, whether it deserves it or not. And maybe that's the through line here: these movies matter less for their polish than for the way they linger, messy, imperfect, and occasionally misunderstood, but deeply tied to the eras and audiences that found something meaningful in them anyway. It started as a joke, something I barely remembered over the years. Back then it felt like hip-hop was sorrowful enough to stop monsters from looking back, with J. Lo as the funnel girl somehow surviving everything. It was one of those movies I watched once, never revisited, and didn't think much about after. So when I heard they were making a new one, not just a remake, but turning it into a comedy, I was like, man, what are they doing? To my surprise, this actually worked. I'm happy to be wrong, and I admit I should never have doubted the power of Paul Rudd, Jack Black, Davin, Chand, and my British guys, even if they missed the mark before. This movie is about a group of friends who've known each other since childhood and are now stuck in the difficult stretch of middle-aged adulthood. Life isn't turning out the way they imagined. One of them is a struggling background actor in LA, whose career peak was a few TV appearances. Another is dealing with dissatisfaction, unrealized dreams, and the feeling of falling short. After a surprise birthday party for a friend's dog and watching the terrible horror movie they once made together, they decide to take a wild shot, go to Brazil and make a new Anaconda film to change their lives. I love how the movie leans into movies about making movies. It talks openly about motivation, insecurity, aging, and creative regret, all wrapped inside jokes about filmmaking itself. I'm guilty of loving this kind of meta stuff, and this movie does it well. Jack Black especially has moments that reminded me of Be Kind Rewind, with the intentionally amateur filmmaking energy. Not connecting this directly to the original story, and instead joking about 90s monster movies, was a smart move. The movie even pokes fun at why the giant snake isn't scary anymore, with CGI that looks intentionally on the same level as the original. It worked for me and clearly felt deliberate. I found Charlie surprisingly funny, even when being bad in a way that works. It's also great to see some actors get the chance to be genuinely funny again. Overall, the humor made sense, the commentary landed, and I walked away enjoying it way more than I ever expected. She is indeed very simple, and that works for her. His character feels like a solid sidekick, and Jenny Ala as Almeida is pretty much exactly what you expect once she shows up. She doesn't get much to do beyond reacting to the chaos and leaning into the silliness, similar to Mr. Trade's role. Schulten Milo as Thank You Bra is a lot of fun and brings a different, more offbeat type of humor to the main group. He has great chemistry with everyone, which really helps the ensemble. The cameos were fine overall, but for me the real joke, and the biggest laugh, was watching these people try to make a movie and then end up having to fight a snake in the most ridiculous way possible. That had me rolling. Maybe it won't work for everyone, but for me Anaconda ends up being a fun, silly comedy and great counter-programming for the holiday season. Thanks to director Tom Gormican, following the unbearable weight of massive talent, along with Sony Pictures, the Anaconda franchise feels alive again. The original 1997 creature feature already had several sequels, including the wild crossover Lake Placid vs. Anaconda, but this is the first real reinvention since Anaconda, The Hunt for the Blood Orchid in 2004. This new take is far more meta and honestly unlike anything we've seen from this property before. Gormican and Anaconda centered the story on Joe and Grave Road, best friends since childhood who have always dreamed of making their all-time favorite movie, of course, the original Anaconda. A midlife crisis finally pushes them to go for it, and they venture into the Amazon with a shoestring budget to make it happen. Naturally, a real giant anaconda shows up right in the middle of production, forcing them into impossible choices. What we get is a classic movie within a movie setup, with Joe and Grave trying to make a film inside a film. Things get even more meta when they discover Sony is actually rebooting Anaconda with the original cast, while they're already in the middle of making their own version. Ice Cube makes a welcome cameo, as does Jennifer Lopez, which adds to the absurd, self-aware nature of the whole thing. Eventually, everything gets resolved and almost everyone makes it out alive, leaving us with a setup for an even more meta sequel that could bring back more of the original Anaconda cast for something bigger. Whether or not that happens remains to be seen, but it's fun to imagine what that follow-up could look like. The movie ends with Joe and Grave, alongside Claire and Jenny, debuting their unofficial Anaconda project at an international film festival. As we learn when the official Sony production rolls through the Amazon, Dog and Grief were never actually second-unit directors, which means they weren't officially cleared to release their movie. That makes the ending a bit of a mixed bag. Things get much more interesting in the epilogue and the credit scene attached to Anaconda, which very clearly sets up the possibility of a sequel. In the epilogue, Lopez shows up at Dog's doorstep, revealing that Sony saw their movie. She explains that the studio is planning another Anaconda and wants Dog to redirect it. Earlier in the movie, we learned that Sony's original production was completely derailed by the same giant snake that also ruined Dog and Grief's film. Just like the original Anaconda, the Amazon proves once again that filming locations can be deadly. Most of the cast and crew appear to be dead, except for Ice Cube and J. Lo. Ice Cube makes a cameo in the third act, where he mentions heading into a divorce but still helps save J. Lo after assisting Joe and the rest of the group. Despite the catastrophic and deadly incident in the Amazon, Sony still seems willing to push forward with a new film in the franchise. They're likely impressed, or at least intrigued, by the attention Dog and Grief's unofficial project received, seeing an opportunity to capitalize on the chaos by making another movie anyway. This means Dobb could finally get his Hollywood dream, directing a proper Anaconda movie with real resources, a real budget, and actual movie stars. But it raises plenty of questions. What would that film even look like? Would grief get swallowed up by the studio system and frustrated by the lack of creative control or meaningful character work? Would Sony really be foolish enough to try filming in the actual Amazon again, risking even more death and destruction? Could Dobb realistically convince the studio to listen to grief's more grounded instincts? Practically speaking, there's a lot to consider. Jack Black is a very busy guy, with a Minecraft movie and another Jumanji sequel among the many projects on his plate. Paul Rudd is also in high demand. Then there's the challenge of wrangling Jennifer Lopez, Ice Cube, and whoever else would return or be brought in for a sequel. The reported budget is a reasonable $45 million, so it wouldn't need to make a massive fortune to be considered a success. Critically, things are a bit trickier. While audiences and fans of this kind of meta-comedy seem to enjoy the new Anaconda, critics have been less kind. It currently holds around a 36% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. If the studio decides that score doesn't really matter, we might still get a sequel that brings everything full circle with more of the original cast. You know that feeling when you're watching a horror movie and it's working, you're into it, leaning forward in your seat, anticipating the next scare, the next kill, the next reveal. You tell yourself, this movie is going to stick the landing. Sometimes it's undone by boneheaded character choices, but in this case, the messiness almost feels like part of the fun. Sometimes it's a sudden change in tone, or a slowdown right when things should be speeding up. Maybe it's a plot turn so stupid that you can no longer take the movie seriously. Horror movies, for whatever reason, seem especially good at tripping over themselves at the finish line. It's like everything comes together just to unravel at the last second. Some of the movies that fall into this category are still very good, sometimes even brilliant, until one choice knocks the wind out of them. A perfect example is Signs. Overall, it's an effective and deeply personal film, with strong performances and one of the greatest scares of all time. It feels intimate, grounded, and emotionally sincere in a way few alien invasion movies ever attempt. That said, the realization that water is the alien's weakness, capped off with a baseball bat finale, feels anticlimactic for a global invasion story. Some critics have been harsher on this ending than others, but it's easy to see why it drains tension from the third act of an otherwise compelling sci-fi film. Even so, the movie as a whole is absolutely worth watching, even by today's standards. A stronger ending might have elevated it into something truly untouchable, instead of leaving it as a slightly frustrating near masterpiece. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho is another fascinating case. It's a masterpiece of setup, a near-perfect blend of pitch-black humor, suspense, and ahead-of-its-time filmmaking. Time hasn't dulled its razor-sharp edge or its immaculate craftsmanship. The famous third-act reveal, that Norman Bates's mother is long dead, preserved in the house, and that Norman himself is the victim of a psychotic break driven by an alternate personality, is incredible. The scene with the spinning chair and swinging light is unforgettable, and the final shot of Norman sitting silently in the cell, lost in his own mind, is chilling. But then the movie slams on the brakes to introduce a psychiatrist who calmly explains the twist to the audience in painstaking detail. It's an obvious studio-era decision. Many films in the 1960s felt the need to spell out shocking revelations, but it ends up spoon-feeding information we already understand through Hitchcock's direction and Anthony Perkins's performance. One of the greatest horror movies ever made literally pauses for 10 minutes just to make sure we get it. Then there's Sinister, a film often cited as one of the scariest ever made. Its ending isn't particularly bad compared to other horror finales, but the rest of the movie is so strong, so unsettling, that the final moments feel oddly deflating. After Ethan Hawke's character, Ellison, unravels the mystery of the missing children and the murdered families, the last stretch fails to stick the landing in a way that fully matches what came before. The film builds terror so effectively that anything less than perfection at the end feels like a letdown, even if the journey itself remains unforgettable. He and his family ultimately find themselves as the latest victims. His daughter Ashley becomes possessed, and he is poisoned by his own family. To knock them unconscious, Ashley drugs them while the demon uses her body to murder them. Their blood is used to paint disturbing images across the walls of the house, including the bugle symbol. We even see Ashley watching her own childhood home movies before the entity appears, grabs her, and seemingly pulls both of them into the screen. We're left with a closing image of Ellison trapped inside a film box, sitting in the attic of the previous family's house, with Ashley's real title card revealed as Film 12. The camera slowly pulls away, only for a large, distorted face to suddenly lunge into frame for one last scare. It's a cheap jump scare that feels completely out of place for a film that's otherwise psychologically haunting. Sinister could have ended on the home movie itself and left audiences with a lingering sense of dread. Instead, it underlines the ending for no reason, closing on something closer to Invasion of the Body Snatchers than the quiet horror it earned. The Faculty is one of the most beloved horror films for an entire generation. Directed by Robert Rodriguez and written by Kevin Williamson, it features an alien invasion that turns teachers and students into emotionless hosts. A group of students from different social cliques, the Breakfast Club formula, band together to stop the aliens and save their school and town from being taken over. The film ends with a fast-forward to 1 month after the invasion, showing how much the characters have changed. Former drug dealer Zeke is now a football star, possibly dating the head cheerleader played by Famke Janssen. Casey, once the most popular girl in school, is now grounded in dating Stan, while former jock Stan has become academically focused. Even the formerly goth, lesbian-coded Stokely is now kissing boys and wearing bright cardigans instead of black eyeliner. What's meant to be a hopeful wrap-up instead feels oddly unsettling, suggesting conformity won in the end. Splice is a modern sci-fi thriller that pushes this discomfort even further. When hybrid specialists Clive and Elsa secretly experiment with human DNA, things quickly spiral out of control. They create Dren, a hybrid being that's part human and part multiple animal species. Elsa begins to care for Dren not just as an experiment, but like a surrogate child. As Dren grows, she becomes increasingly difficult to control, especially after reaching sexual maturity. The film crosses into deeply uncomfortable territory when Dren becomes sexually involved with Clive, technically consensual, but disturbing given that he helped raise her. Things get even worse when Dren appears to die, only to return later in a male form and assault Elsa, whose DNA was used to create her. The movie ends with a pharmaceutical company stepping in, insisting Elsa keep the baby because its DNA represents a scientific miracle, an ending that feels morally bleak and unresolved rather than shocking. Finally, Becky, 2020, is an action thriller that stars Lulu Wilson as a teenage girl vacationing with her father, his fiancé, and her young son. When a group of escaped convicts led by a white supremacist attack their cabin searching for a mysterious key, Becky is forced to fight back. The result is essentially Home Alone reimagined as a violent survival horror film, brutal, pulpy, and far more intense than it has any right to be. She kills them in increasingly gruesome ways and faces off against one of the ugliest villains imaginable in a finale that should feel triumphant. The problem with Becky comes in the moments after the conflict ends. Instead of addressing the emotional toll of the violence she's committed, the film shows Becky smiling and casually playing with the key on a chain around her neck. The movie hints that maybe Becky has become just as bad as the men she killed, infected by the same love of violence. The girl we were rooting for the entire time might actually be a monster, and that really undercuts what was otherwise a fun, fast-moving, adrenaline-pumping brawl of a movie. David Bruckner's The Ritual is a haunting film about guilt, grief, and male bonding. It follows 4 friends, Phil, Dom, Hutch, and Luke, who go on a hiking trip through the Scandinavian wilderness in memory of their friend Rob, who died in a tragic accident. As the journey progresses, the ugly truth about what happened to Rob becomes impossible to avoid, and Luke is forced to confront his own cowardice and guilt. It's a powerful movie, no question, with one of the most striking creature designs in modern horror, a nightmarish Jotun stalking them through the forest. Despite the film's eerie atmosphere and genuinely chilling moments, the final act shifts tone dramatically. One by one, Luke's remaining friends are killed, leaving him captured by cultists who worship the creature and prepare him for ritual sacrifice. Luke escapes by burning their temple and confronting the creature directly, leading to a prolonged chase that feels like it belongs to a completely different movie. While Luke ultimately escapes, the ending feels less subtle and more conventional, doing no favors for an otherwise excellent film. The escape room films are largely entertaining, and audiences have mostly been on board so far, especially with the clever twists and puzzle-based tension. However, the problem that emerges by the end of Tournament of Champions is the need to tie every entry together. The idea of pitting previous winners against each other is strong, but it doesn't need to extend beyond that. Instead, the sequel leans heavily into franchise building and serialization, clearly influenced by the current cinematic landscape. Rather than focusing on a new group of people, a new story, and a new set of deadly escape rooms in each installment, everything is now connected. While audiences may still show up for another escape room because of the traps and thrills, it feels like there was a better way forward than forcing a continuity no one was really asking for. The Descent, 2005, is widely regarded as one of the best horror films of the new millennium, but the UK version has an entirely different ending than the one shown to American audiences. Despite being the ending originally intended by director Neil Marshall, the UK ending of The Descent is arguably the weaker version. In the US cut, Sarah escapes the cave, gets into her car, and attempts to drive away, only to be jolted by a vision of her dead friend Juno sitting in the passenger seat. She panics, snaps back to reality, and the film ends. Yes, it's a cheap jump scare, but it also allows Sarah to survive as a final girl and actually escape the nightmare. In the UK version, Sarah is still trapped in the cave and has completely lost her grip on reality. She hallucinates a reunion with her dead daughter, believing she's safe, when in truth she's still underground, surrounded by darkness and monsters. It's relentlessly bleak, leaving the audience with the sense that Sarah is doomed to die alone, slowly driven mad by trauma and the cave creatures. Marshall has argued that both endings are equally bleak, but at least in the US version audiences aren't left utterly crushed by the inevitability of Sarah's fate. M. Night Shyamalan is well known for twist endings, but as his filmography shows, not all twists are created equal. Old, loosely based on the graphic novel Sandcastle by Pierre-Oscar Levy and Frederick Peters, follows several families vacationing on a secluded beach who quickly discover that time moves differently there, causing them to age rapidly and die within hours. For most of its runtime, the film works as a high-stakes thriller, watching characters succumb to accelerated illness, madness, and violence as their lives race toward natural death. The twist reveals that the beach is a controlled testing site, where electromagnetic forces rapidly accelerate cellular aging. The purpose is to speed up pharmaceutical trials, allowing companies to observe an entire drug's life cycle in a single day. This experiment turns out to be Trial 73, and despite the mountain of corpses, the company celebrates because one medication successfully prevented seizures in patients for years. While the concept is chilling, the ending softens its impact by revealing that Trent and Maddox, now middle-aged, escape the beach and are able to expose the company. That sliver of hope blunts what should have been a devastating final note. Before Host took the screen life concept to new heights, there was Unfriended, the 2014 horror film that proved how effective this format could be. The premise is simple but unsettling. On the one-year anniversary of Laura Barnes's suicide, a group of her classmates video chat on Skype, casually discussing her death and their role in it. As the night goes on, strange things begin to happen. Messages appear from Laura's old Facebook account, and an unknown user joins the call, uninvited and impossible to remove. The presence starts asking questions, then making demands, and eventually turns violent. What begins as awkward cruelty spirals into guilt, punishment, and terror. Unfriended is genuinely chilling, using familiar digital spaces to create a sense of inescapable dread, and proving that sometimes the scariest horror stories are the ones that never leave your screen. It robs you in the end, after spending nearly its entire 1 hour and 23-minute runtime absolutely chilling you to the bone. It breaks its own internal logic so abruptly that the final scare compromises the impact of everything that came before it. Thankfully, the series made up for this with its strong standalone sequel, Unfriended, Dark Web in 2018. But it doesn't change the fact that an otherwise stellar horror movie fumbles itself in the final minute. The Scream franchise is probably the most consistent horror series out there. That said, the second entry is unquestionably the weakest of the bunch, and for a very specific reason. Kevin Williamson's sharp, self-aware, and intelligent screenplay, so essential to the first and later entries, feels diluted here. While it's undeniably fun watching characters like Gale Weathers and Parker Posey's version of her bounce off one another, the decision to make this the first and only film in the series with a single killer was a misstep. The reveal of the killer as Billy Loomis's half-brother, born to Maureen Prescott, reframes the motive in a way that feels awkward and underdeveloped. Worse, it pushes Sydney toward abandoning the trauma and survival instincts that have defined her character. By the end, she returns home to her fortified compound and casually throws open the front gates, running into the house with an ease that makes no sense given everything she's endured. The final moment, where Sydney leaves the front door wide open after settling in to watch a movie, stands as the most nonsensical ending in the entire franchise. It completely betrays not only her character arc, but basic logic and common sense. That's all you get. Roll credits. It's understandable why the filmmakers behind Pet Sematary wanted to change the ending. Audiences were already familiar with the famous conclusion from both the original film and Stephen King's novel, so giving viewers something new made sense in theory. Unfortunately, what we got simply doesn't work. The remake abandons the bleak, unsettling tone of the original and replaces it with a chaotic finale that contradicts its own rules. The film goes out of its way to show how dangerous, exhausting, and time-consuming it is to retrieve a body from the burial ground, only to later ignore time and distance entirely so multiple characters can be resurrected. The result is an almost Avengers-style team-up of undead characters that sacrifices internal logic just to be different. The final image, a grieving father staring down his resurrected family, should be chilling. Instead, it comes off as oddly silly. It's a sour note in an otherwise solid film. Jacob's Ladder meets 47 Meters Down style survival horror is the kind of movie that really shouldn't work as well as it does. On paper, it sounds like an overly simplistic premise. Two sisters go cage diving while vacationing in Mexico, connected to the surface by only a thin cable before everything goes wrong. They're sent plunging 47 meters down, surrounded by dark water and apex predators. It's a simple setup, but that simplicity is exactly what makes 47 meters down so terrifying. Every scare is earned. The film takes its time building suffocating, unbearable tension, only to release it in sudden, violent bursts. For most of its runtime, the movie seems poised to end on a truly bleak note. Lisa is trapped below, hallucinating her sister while her air supply rapidly runs out. Kate escapes, reaches the surface, and survives, only for us to realize Lisa never made it out at all. That would have been a perfect, horrifying ending. Instead, the film undercuts itself by introducing a last-minute rescue team that saves Lisa. It's obvious her sister believes she's dead, and letting Lisa survive somehow feels wrong. What could have been a pitch-black, unforgettable ending turns into something oddly softened at the very last second. At first glance, the pitch for the new Anaconda movie sounded almost perfect. Two childhood best friends reunite to reboot a 1997 Jennifer Lopez Ice Cube creature feature, with Jack Black and Paul Rudd playing the leads. The trailers promised a hilarious, scrappy tone, like a comedic Jaws filtered through amateur filmmaking chaos. Written by Cameron and Tom Gormican and directed with a deliberately absurd sensibility, it seemed primed to celebrate messy creativity and low-budget passion. Instead, the movie gets tangled up in its own cleverness. Rather than keeping things simple, it piles on subplots, including a half-baked thriller angle that pulls focus away from the comedy. The female characters are underwritten, and while the male characters fare slightly better, the movie keeps stopping dead to lecture the audience about what makes a great movie. These long, self-serious debates feel completely out of place in a film that's supposed to be a breezy action comedy. What made the premise so exciting was the hope that this would feel like a spiritual successor to Be Kind Rewind, a celebration of determined filmmakers doing their best with whatever junk they have on hand. Instead of fully embracing that unconventional, scrappy energy, the movie settles into a more generic action comedy groove, turning filmmaking itself into just another joke rather than the heart of the story. Jack Blackstock and Paul Rudd's Glazer are lifelong friends who once dreamed of making movies but now scrape by filming wedding videos for a living. Doc's childhood best friend, Ronald Grieve Gray, chased that dream all the way to Los Angeles, only to end up a struggling actor whose biggest success was a brief appearance on SWAT. When the opportunity arises to reboot Anaconda in the Brazilian Amazon, they see it as a chance to finally make that dream come true. Their old friends Kenny, Jeffy, and Claire reluctantly join them, along with a shady snake handler and a questionable riverboat, to shoot their version of Anaconda using a real, live snake. Naturally, things go sideways when they wander into the territory of an enormous, aggressive anaconda. On paper, this is exactly the kind of movie about friendship and the love of filmmaking that should work. There's a genuinely smart version of this film where watching Doc and his friends struggle to make a movie is the main appeal, and where the charm comes from seeing the messy, amateur footage they create. Shockingly, director Tom Gormican seems uninterested in showing that process. We get one lazy montage of filming, and once the giant snake shows up, the movie completely forgets that these characters are supposed to be making a movie at all. Despite constantly insisting they're horror fans, Doc and Grief apparently have never heard of found footage, or the most basic rule of filmmaking, never stop shooting. It's an absolutely bonkers creative choice. Jack Black is one of the most naturally charismatic comedians alive, a performer whose energy carried films like School of Rock, Jumanji, The Holiday, and even the upcoming Minecraft movie. He's also the frontman of Tenacious D, a comedy rock band built entirely on his wild, unhinged presence. Casting him as the level-headed straight man here actively works against his strengths. The movie constantly mutes the very thing that makes him special. Paul Rudd, meanwhile, is stuck in a strangely hollow role. His chemistry with Black feels awkward, like the movie can't decide who's supposed to land the punchlines. To his credit, Zazie Beetz, as Zahn, tries to make the most of what she's given, leaning into her role as a guarded, self-serious friend who insists she's above hard drugs because she only drinks wine, beer, and light liquor. Mello brings some silliness as the eccentric snake handler, but the rest of the cast is tangled in such a convoluted plot that they barely get the chance to be funny. Claire's character, in particular, feels paper-thin, existing mostly to serve as a romantic object and moral anchor, despite the actress previously delivering strong performances in The Suicide Squad, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and American Horror Story. It's frustrating to see her reduced to a function rather than a character. The original Anaconda wasn't good, but it was fun. It understood exactly what people wanted, famous actors running from a giant snake. This new version sets itself up as if it understands that too, Jack Black and Paul Rudd being goofy while making a ridiculous snake movie, but what we get instead is an oddly restrained action comedy where neither the action nor the comedy ever fully commits. It's the same issue that drags down the unbearable weight of massive talent, a premise that promises something wild and meta, but delivers something surprisingly safe. Did this Anaconda make me feel the same way I did 28 years ago when I watched the original for the first time? Absolutely not. But did I still have a blast watching this ridiculous movie unfold? Yeah. I kind of did. I did, and I have had a sport like I've never seen. So I was excited to see what could be done with a cast of characters associated with absurd humor, meta jokes, and a love of filmmaking for the sheer joy of it. But this movie does not have the spirit I expected. It's sloppy, clunky, and messy with the snake, but there's no real soul behind it. The film's entertainment editor, based in New York City, is an established critic and festival reporter who has covered countless film festivals, co-hosted movie-focused broadcasts, and interviewed a wide array of performers and filmmakers. She would rightly be suspicious of any comedy that promises self-aware hijinks, ensuring the jokes don't outshine the story. During the opening sequence of this snake horror adventure, it's immediately clear that director Tom Gormican struggles with mood, suspense, or even properly introducing a wild creature. Instead, the movie settles into the mediocrity of its premise, a filmmaker who has spent years languishing in a compromise between making wedding videos and chasing childhood dreams finally attempts a massive, ridiculous ambition. Meanwhile, his childhood best friend joins him, and the pair's reunion is meant to feel heartfelt, but it often lands flat. The character supposedly comes into the rights to remake Anaconda, which should be a thrilling setup, yet it feels deflating to watch. Jack Black and Paul Rudd share the screen beautifully, but their talents are never fully harnessed. The underdog dream of these characters is reduced to broad comedy, with Hollywood stereotypes layered over them, humble, failed dreamers trying to make something big. Where the movie occasionally shines is in the smaller touches, the sweetness lingers pleasantly, like tiny moments of real friendship or affection between the characters. Gormican includes montages of brainstorming and prepping for the giant snake movie, and for fleeting moments, these sequences work, showing thoughtfulness, playfulness, and camaraderie. Paul Rudd's gentle warmth as a friend and Black's chaotic energy work together well, while Grief's attempts at performing alongside a literal pig in his mouth are genuinely funny. Yet the film repeatedly blows its own opportunities. The unbearable weight of massive talent sometimes mistakes self-awareness for cleverness, and this Anaconda remake similarly confuses showing up with substance. When Rudd and Black land genuine comedic and emotional beats, it's exhilarating, but far too often, the movie squanders them. The result is a film that promises fun, chaos, and meta-comedy but rarely delivers on any of its big ideas. especially when trying to figure out how to push the crew into greater danger as they face bigger, scarier snakes. Dandy once they're using the photo film as nab. Collector has to appear obvious to keep her plot option open, but in the movie, it's nearly impossible to pin down her relationship with any other cast member, not least because characters seem to vanish and reappear at random, despite much of the film taking place on a small board. Still, Rowe and Black make the newly conscious effect-based case selection feel more like an experiment than a full-blown horror comedy. An intense PHM of the ear isn't necessary to have a good enough time here, and the movie deserves credit for smuggling a 2000s-style studio comedy back into theaters and dedicated audiences. Anna never quite reaches the height of self-aware, similarly shamed comedy-born figures, but she shares DNA with them, and the movie itself is a silly, chance snack. Anaconda must not happen, because I don't want any of what's on his funny first. He's laying down gags like no one makes sense, but the actor following his Nola-skiing joke of the unbearable weight of massive talent is doing a filmmaking comedy. His phone was six-inker, a concept of execution that unfortunately comes undone. Kevin Gavin Hahn struggles to make rival board survival thrills fit into a Hollywood star-shaped industry obsessed with intellectual property. The film score is wholesome, about creating for the people you love, but the subplot about illegal activities triggers a jarring F-show horn design. Runtime batting Daniel Melchior flares at casual Captain Anna animator Y ransomely without the added package. Laughter is hard to come by as ridiculous cake frequently impairs snack-based tension, and punchlines fall almost as often as a dealer with a pull to the big boy hero band. Jack Black gives a mark, going full Jack Black, putting all that energy into the film while handcuffed by his character. Basic writing tools are placed, themselves slapping on the back or giving shades of King Kong panic film new against monster devotion. The force strikes all the time, it's fun, sad, but Keegan doesn't have any eye on character sense. The problem is an Anaconda report that starts with her dirt bike escapades in a P-show, a strange, confusing deficit introducing the snacks, but between uninspired CGI and bland editing, it's more content warning than entertainment. Consecutive killings stumble into the boring reality. Anaconda only has one horror trick. No S-letter under your skin. Nor does it give any Napabian on-screen to appear PG-13. In 1997, a brief snake moment would have been more thrilling than the lifeless pixels on display. The universal story and comedy styling of droopy Americans trapped in lazy setups get made by payoff, but there's not much. Jokes about brighter dogs, arguments over who's better, or Sony's desire to catch the Anaconda, don't get me wrong, Gone had me holding at a few callbacks. Who doesn't love a Jurassic Park homage father? These elements part into an even bigger mess, an already fractal blender. Who is this road for? Frankly, Isotrace diametrically for Nent and Sam's Anaconda feels like a mockery of a beloved material. It's also unsurprisingly dry, leaning on low-hanging fruit in a sacrificial bag for further development. The concept, what if the boss is trying to make an anaconda for themselves inside an anaconda, is executed at fair value but hardly reaches full potential. For such a bold idea, everything feels so generic. The humor, the bag, Black in a kicksword, my heart and reports, your polyboard protein is a tropic hand, it's all stock material, pre-packaged and disappointing, a follow-up to our Corin who cannot grasp and suet brush of hacking by an infected trolley, unable to deliver. There were two moments to a redeeming climax, brief RS glimpses of creature-fueled excitement and belly-tweaking humor, but they were separated and fleeting. Ambition struggled to keep the movie in 3D, the result is a glimmering, flawed film. Contact with aqua horror, practical effects, and midnight movie entertainment, what an old-school choice. In 1994, Sony Pictures made Anaconda, a notoriously inspired creature feature starring Jennifer Lopez's Ice Cube and Faria's animation snack. Daler and Knockoff were conceived as horror, but many received it as comedy, the kind where the viewer winds up fluffing at the corny bad decisions made by characters in desperate need of a bigger board. So when it came to the franchise, the studio had a choice, play it straight or lean into the humor. Enter Ching Daigan, the mind behind 2022's The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, a mostly clever meta-comedy featuring NAR himself actively parading the kind of sprawling action movie work that's kept him busy in recent years. The concept ultimately promises more than it executes. What the filmmakers manage to deliver feels underwhelming, failing to match the ambition, and arriving at a place that's only half soulful, half spectacle. Anaconda, the 2026 reboot, is a strange mix of absurd comedy, meta-filmmaking, and classic creature feature thrills. The story follows lifelong friends Dog, Jack Black, and Ronald Gra, Paul Rudd, who once dreamed of making movies but now get by shooting wedding videos. Their childhood ambition reignites when they decide to remake Anaconda in the Brazilian Amazon, joined by their old friends Kenny, Jeffy, Zahn, and Claire. Their plan, to film a giant snake movie using a real, enormous anaconda. Naturally, things go horribly, and hilariously, wrong. The movie is about friendship and the joy of making films with your friends. On paper, it's a clever meta-premise, a film about friends making a film, complete with all the chaos, mishaps, and amateur filmmaking struggles that would naturally ensue. Gormican, the director, seems genuinely interested in showing the crew at work, with sequences of brainstorming, prepping, and shooting giving glimpses of their dreams in action. But the moment the giant snake appears, the meta-movie-making element gets lost entirely. Dog, Gra, and the others abandon the craft to panic in classic horror style, leaving the audience wondering why the film bothers with its movie-within-a-movie premise at all. Jack Black and Paul Rudd are the highlights, delivering comedic energy, charm, and chemistry that make almost every scene they share entertaining. Their interactions remind you why these actors are so beloved. Black's chaotic presence and Rudd's grounded warmth balance perfectly. Yet, despite their performances, the supporting cast is largely wasted. Characters like Claire exist only as objects of affection, and others barely get lines or moments to shine. This leaves much of the ensemble flat, tangled in a convoluted plot that never gives them room to breathe or be funny. The tone of the film swings wildly. It attempts horror, but the scares are minimal. It attempts action, but the set pieces rarely feel dangerous. It attempts comedy, but only Rudd and Black consistently land their moments. Even the meta elements, which could have been a fresh take on the Anaconda franchise, feel safe and unambitious. The movie hints at chaos, a live snake on set, a dangerous Amazonian environment, but these moments never fully deliver tension, suspense, or genuine thrills. Instead, the film oscillates between silly humor, clumsy reaction shots, and occasional creature feature mayhem. Where the movie occasionally works is in its small, heartfelt touches. Moments of friendship, affection, and collaboration between the characters remind you that the movie is at its core about joy, the joy of creating something with people you care about. Montages of prep, brainstorming, and on-set shenanigans offer glimpses of this, and for fleeting moments, the movie feels like it could have been something truly fun and inventive. There's also a sweetness in seeing Black and Rudd commit fully to the absurdity of their characters' dreams, even as the film struggles to balance tone, narrative, and spectacle. Yet, time and again, the film squanders these opportunities. The snake sequences, instead of feeling dangerous or thrilling, feel cartoonish. The meta-humor, instead of being clever or insightful, often feels like a superficial nod to "we know this is ridiculous." The comedy sometimes lands, sometimes falls flat. The plot, which could have been a tight, self-contained story about friendship and ambition, expands into a long, meandering series of misadventures that rarely cohere. Ultimately, the reboot of Anaconda is a movie of contrasts. On one hand, it has incredible comedic talent, flashes of meta-ingenuity, and moments of genuine warmth. On the other, it's sloppy, uneven, and fails to fully embrace either horror, action, or comedy. It's entertaining, but it doesn't live up to the chaotic, inventive promise of its premise. For fans of Jack Black, Paul Rudd, or meta-comedy, it's worth a watch. For anyone hoping for a truly scary or thrilling Anaconda experience, it's a mixed bag, but it's impossible not to enjoy at least some of the ride. In the end, the film feels like a love letter to the absurdity of filmmaking itself, even if it's messy and flawed. It's a chaotic, uneven, occasionally hilarious adventure through the Amazon with friends, snakes, and dreams, and for all its faults, it's undeniably watchable.